Okay friends, one of the first things we have to do to get started on our job is to safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, remove all 5 of your lug nuts and then the wheel. Now that the wheel's off, we're going to continue on by removing this clip that comes right across here. Now from the back side of the caliper, we're going to remove these 2 caps right here. There's one there, one up top. Now we can remove our slider pins. Set those aside. Now let's use a pry bar. We're going to come in between the caliper and the bracket and separate the 2. The next thing you want to do is inspect the caliper right along this area here. Make sure you don't see any fluid. If you do, it's probably brake fluid, and if that's the case, you need to replace the caliper. Let's set this aside. Let's get the pads out of here. Now let's remove our 2 caliper bracket mounting bolts. Just going to start that in there a couple threads and then remove the other one. Remove your bracket, set it aside. Remove the rotor. Okay, now that the rotor's off of there, the next thing that we need to do is clean down the wheel bearing mating surface. This is going to be the area that the rotor sits right up against, so you want to make sure you have any of the debris off of there. That way the rotor isn't sitting off kilter. Okay, once you have the mating surface cleaned down, let's pay attention to the back side of the bearing right along here as well. Make sure you don't have a whole bunch of rot flakes like what we have here. Any of this could potentially fall into your brakes and cause an issue, not to mention if you have any flakes up along your backing plate as well. Now, obviously, I could spend all day cleaning this up, but I'm going to move along. Let's continue on by applying a little bit of copper never seized to the mating surface of our wheel bearing. Let's go ahead and clean up the braking surface on our brand new rotor. Now let's get it on the car. Take one of your lug nuts, start it on there just to hold the rotor from moving around on you. Now the next thing that we're going to want to do is clean down our caliper bracket. Essentially we want to make sure that we have all 4 corners where the pads are going to touch up against nice and clean so there's no restriction. Okay, so we cleaned up all 4 corners on our caliper bracket, so let's go ahead and set that aside. The next thing that we want to do is clean up our slider pins here. You can see all the dark areas. That's essentially debris that's going to cause this from not sliding properly. Make sure you clean them up so it's just nice and smooth metal. Alright, so we cleaned them up and they look great. If you see a whole bunch of pitting on yours, obviously that's going to cause a restriction. You'd probably want to replace them. These look fine, so let's set them aside and let's move over to the vehicle. Now back over at the car, we want to clean up the caliper itself. You can see that I have a whole bunch of debris sitting inside here. Let's go ahead and clean that up real quick, and then we'll make sure that we get inside of the slider ports as well. Cleaned up this whole area right here. Now let's go ahead and clean up the slider ports. I'm just going to use a rag that I twisted. I'll slide it through and then just rub it back and forth so I can clean out any of the crud inside. The next thing we're going to do is carefully slide back this boot right here. You're going to find that there's a lip. We want to try to make sure that we clean out that lip as good as possible because that's where the pad clip's going to sit. Let's continue on by pushing in the caliper piston. Now this piston right here isn't something that you can just carefully squeeze and press right in. What you're going to have to do is either get a special tool or use some long nose pliers like these, put them right into these slots right here, and then we're going to have to press it in while we try to spin it at the same time. Now it's going to be time to get ready to put our caliper bracket on, but before we do that, let's just apply a thin amount of caliper grease right along the areas that we cleaned up. This is going to help make sure that moisture doesn't develop there again and cause more rust. Now at this point we can put on our caliper bracket with our 2 bolts. I like to use a little bit of red thread locker. We'll start in both of these bolts, snug them up, and then we'll torque them to 81 foot-pounds. Now the next thing we need to do is apply a thin amount of caliper grease right to the piston right here. And then we'll go along the back of both of these ears. This is going to help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. Now it's going to be time to insert our inner pad. You're going to see that it has 3 little clips on it. Those clips essentially need to fit along the inside area of this piston where there's a little lip. So I'm just going to rest it right up against there, slide it right on down, and it should lock in. There we are. Just double check, make sure they're all seated properly. And for the outer pad, we'll put it right into the bracket. Now let's take the caliper, we'll slide it over the outer pad and bring it right down. Now let's take both of our slider pins. We're gonna apply some caliper grease to the shaft area of these. Now we can take these, we'll slide them in from the backside there, twisting them so we can work in the grease as we press them in. Now let's go ahead and bottom out both of our sliders and then we'll torque them to 20 foot-pounds. Don't forget to put on your protective caps. Now it's time to put on the retainer spring. We're just going to go ahead and line this up with its corresponding hole. Give it a couple loving bonks. Make sure the ear comes up and over the bracket right there, and then we'll do the same on the other side. Let's get this lug nut off of here. Grab the wheel. We'll put it on there, start all of our lug nuts, get the wheel back on the ground, and then we'll tighten these up to 89 foot-pounds. Torqued. Okay friends, we got the driver's side of the brakes done. What's left to do now? You're gonna do the same exact thing to the passenger side. Easy peasy. Aside from that, go ahead and pump up the brakes so they're nice and firm. Get under the hood, check your master cylinder, make sure it's full. After that, take it for a road test.